Hey, amazing viewers! Before we go into this riveting narrative, drop your location in the comments below. We love connecting with you all around the world. Also, if this is your first time here, press the subscribe button and join our incredible journey. Let's hit 10,000 subscribers this month together. Your support means everything. A chance encounter in the forest. It was a quiet Sunday morning when I decided to take a walk in the forest. The trees whispered with the wind, and the birds chirped as if they were speaking a language of their own. I had been feeling a bit down lately. Life had not been easy for me. I grew up in a small town where opportunities were few and dreams even fewer. My family wasn't wealthy, not even close. We had just enough to scrape by, and I often found myself longing for a life beyond the everyday struggles. But on that particular morning, the walk wasn't about escaping my life. It was just about getting away from the walls of my small apartment. I didn't expect anything unusual that day. But as I ventured deeper into the woods, something caught my eye. There, lying between the dense bushes and wild vines, was a man. At first glance, I thought he was just another hiker who had collapsed from exhaustion. But as I got closer, I realized something wasn't right. His clothes were expensive, torn and stained with dirt and blood. His face was pale, his eyes barely open. His chest rose and fell with labored breath, but he was unconscious, barely clinging to life. I hesitated. Who was he? What was he doing out here in the middle of nowhere? But before I could think it through, something deep inside me pushed me forward. I couldn't leave him there. I knelt down beside him, my hands trembling slightly. His face looked so unfamiliar, yet I couldn't ignore the feeling that I had seen him somewhere before. But in the heat of the moment, I couldn't focus on that. His condition was far more pressing. "Hey, are you okay?" I whispered, shaking him gently. No response. I quickly checked for a pulse. There it was, faint but there. I knew I had to act fast, but I wasn't trained for anything like this. All I had was a small first aid kit that I carried for emergencies, but this was beyond anything I had ever encountered. I looked around the forest, wondering if I could find someone nearby, but there was no one. The silence of the trees felt heavy, as if they were watching me. The weight of the moment was sinking in. I couldn't just leave him here to die. My heart raced as I considered my options. I couldn't just drag him out of the woods. The nearest hospital was miles away, and there was no way I could carry him on my own. My mind was racing, but one thing was clear: I couldn't just leave him. I looked around again, and that's when I noticed a small creek not far off. It wasn't much, but it might give me the chance I needed. If I could just get him to the water, I could try to wash off the blood and assess the damage more clearly. I wasn't sure if I could save him, but I was going to try. I wasn't going to let someone die alone in the forest when there was something I could do. It took all of my strength, but somehow I managed to drag him closer to the creek. The man barely stirred as I gently dipped his head into the cool water, hoping it would wake him, or at least bring some clarity. The water seemed to revive him, just enough for him to murmur something barely audible. "Help, please." His voice was weak, but the desperation in his words struck me. I didn't know who he was or why he was here, but something told me that helping him was the right thing to do. I stayed with him by the creek for what felt like hours, using my phone to call for help, hoping to find a way to get him to safety. But all I could do was keep him calm, speaking softly, reassuring him that help was on the way. As I sat there, watching the sun slowly begin to rise through the trees, I started thinking about the life I had lived, the hardships, the struggles. I had never imagined that a day like this would come, where I would be called upon to help someone in need. Eventually, emergency responders arrived. They took over, assessing the man's condition with the professionalism I could only dream of. As they worked, one of them turned to me, his face filled with surprise. "How did you find him?" he asked, genuinely shocked. "I was just walking," I replied, almost in disbelief myself. He paused, glancing back at the man who was now being carefully loaded into the ambulance. "Well, you saved his life. That's for sure." And at that moment, it hit me. I had saved someone's life today. Someone who might have otherwise been lost to the woods, to the unknown. It wasn't just a simple rescue, it was a turning point. Not just for him, but for me too. That moment made me realize something I had forgotten. It's not about the hand you're dealt in life, but what you do with it. As the ambulance drove away, I stood there, still in shock, trying to comprehend everything that had just unfolded. What kind of man was he? Why had he been out in the woods alone, injured? I couldn't help but wonder about the story behind this man, the life he led, and what had brought him to that moment in time. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of something much bigger, something that would change both our lives in ways I could never have imagined. And it would all start with the simple decision to help someone in need, a decision that would ripple through our lives and leave us both forever changed. But who was he? And what would happen next? That was a question that would unfold in the days to come. A glimpse of a different world. The days that followed were a blur. I went back to my routine. Work, home, and the occasional escape into the forest for some quiet time. But that day in the woods, that moment of decision, kept replaying in my mind. I couldn't shake the image of the injured man, his face pale and unfamiliar. Every time I closed my eyes, I wondered who he was and how he had ended up in the woods, alone and nearly lifeless. Then, a week later, as I was on my way home from the grocery store, my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but something about the tone of the call caught my attention. "Hello. Is this Sarah?" A voice asked, smooth and calm, but with a hint of something I couldn't quite place. "Yes, this is Sarah," I answered, my voice uncertain. "Who's calling?" "This is Robert Price," the voice replied. "I'm the man you found in the woods." I froze. My heart skipped a beat. The name sounded vaguely familiar, but I couldn't place it. Robert Price. Was he someone I should know? "Mr. Price," I said, my voice suddenly feeling small. I didn't expect to hear from you. I didn't even know if you would remember what happened." "I remember everything," he said, his voice steady and clear. "And I owe you my life." I didn't know how to respond to that. The weight of his words hung heavy in the air. He owed me his life. I had simply done what anyone would do in that situation. But hearing it from him made it feel much bigger than just a simple act of kindness. It was as if the universe had conspired to bring our paths together for a reason. And now, it seemed, he wanted to repay me somehow. "I don't know what to say," I said finally. "I didn't do anything special. I just helped you." "You don't understand," he replied, his tone sincere but intense. "What you did was far more than just helping me. I've been given another chance at life, and I need to thank you properly. Can we meet?" His words sent a wave of confusion and curiosity through me. Who was he, really? And why was he so insistent on thanking me? I don't know if that's necessary," I said, feeling awkward. "I just did what anyone would do." But he wasn't having it. "Please," he insisted, "just hear me out. It's important." After a long pause, I agreed, though I still wasn't sure what was happening. We set a time to meet at a nearby cafe, and as I hung up the phone, I couldn't help but wonder what kind of man Robert Price was. Was he someone I should be wary of, or was he truly just grateful for what I had done? The more I thought about it, the more I realized I needed answers. The next afternoon, I found myself sitting at a table in a quaint cafe, the scent of freshly brewed coffee mingling with the soft chatter of other patrons. I was nervous, unsure of what to expect. My mind raced with possibilities. What did Robert Price want from me? And why did he feel the need to meet in person? A few minutes later, the door opened and I saw him. The man from the forest. But now he was different. Clean-shaven, his clothes crisp and well-tailored. He looked like someone who belonged in a high-end office building, not lost in the woods and fighting for his life. "Sarah," he said, walking toward me with a calm confidence that was almost unsettling. His eyes were sharp, intelligent, but there was a certain warmth behind them, a kindness I hadn't noticed before. I nodded, standing to greet him. As we shook hands, I couldn't help but notice how firm his grip was, how his presence seemed to command the space around him. He was a man who carried himself with authority, and it was hard to reconcile this version of Robert Price with the one I had found half dead in the woods. "I'm glad you agreed to meet," he said, taking a seat across from me. "I wanted to personally thank you for what you did. You saved my life, and I will never be able to repay you enough." His words felt heavier in person. I wasn't sure how to respond, so I just smiled awkwardly and gestured for the waiter to bring us coffee. "So," I said, trying to break the tension, "what exactly happened? How did you end up in the woods?" He looked down for a moment, as though deciding how much to reveal. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter, more serious. "It's a long story," he began, "but I'll try to keep it short. I'm a businessman, or at least I was. I built my wealth from nothing, worked day and night to get to where I am today. But in the process, I lost everything that mattered. My family, my friends, my happiness, everything." He paused, as if searching for the right words. "I got caught up in the wrong things," he continued, "chasing after success, after power, after status. But I was hollow inside. I didn't realize it until everything collapsed. My marriage ended in divorce, my business crumbled, and I was left with nothing but the cold comfort of money. I was stunned. I had no idea a man like him could be so vulnerable. He was a millionaire, for crying out loud, a man who seemed to have everything, and yet he was telling me he had nothing at all. I took to the woods," he said, shaking his head. "I needed to escape, to get away from everything. I wanted to disconnect from the world and think about what I had become. But I made a mistake. I went too far. I wasn't prepared, and when I got injured, I thought that would be it for me." He looked up at me, his gaze intense. "Then you showed up," he said simply, "out of nowhere, and you saved me." I didn't know how to respond. His story was so far removed from anything I could relate to. I had always struggled, always fought just to keep going, and yet here was a man who had it all, and lost it all, only to find himself in the woods, facing the consequences of his choices. "Why are you telling me all of this?" I asked, my voice soft. "Because you deserve to know the truth," he replied. "You deserve to know that I'm not just some stranger. I'm someone who has been given a second chance, and I want to make things right. I want to make a difference in the world, in the way I've never done before." I stared at him, trying to make sense of everything he was saying. There was so much I didn't understand, but something in his eyes told me he was serious. He wasn't the man he had been before. He was someone new, someone who had learned something about life that most of us never get the chance to learn. And at that moment, I realized that my decision to help him, to show kindness to a stranger, had done more than just save a life. It had changed the course of both of our lives. A life transformed. Over the next few days, Robert and I stayed in touch, and I began to learn more about him, about his life before the accident, the choices that led him down a path of emptiness, and the overwhelming guilt that had consumed him. But something was different about him now. There was a clarity in his eyes, a sense of purpose that hadn't been there before. It was as if the near-death experience had peeled away the layers of his former self, revealing a man who was ready to change. It wasn't long before he asked me to meet him again, this time for dinner. As much as I had tried to push the thoughts of him to the back of my mind, I couldn't help but wonder how someone so successful, so driven, had gotten to such a low point in his life. And more importantly, why did he want to share this with me? When we met at the restaurant, I immediately noticed the difference in him. He was dressed casually, but there was something more approachable about his demeanor now. The arrogant confidence that had once marked his every move seemed to have softened. He greeted me with a warm smile, his hand extended as if we were old friends, though I knew we weren't. Not yet. "Sarah," he said, his voice calm but full of gratitude. "Thank you again for agreeing to meet. I've been thinking a lot about everything, and I want to be honest with you about something." I raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Of course. What's on your mind?" He took a deep breath before speaking, as though preparing to share something deeply personal. "I've spent so much of my life focused on success, on building wealth, on being the best. But in the process, I lost sight of what truly matters, my connections with people, my ability to make a real difference. And when you found me, I realized I had a choice. I could keep running from my mistakes, or I could use this second chance to do something meaningful, something that would honor the person I once was, and the person I want to become." His words were raw and real, and for the first time, I saw the man who had been hiding behind the suit and the business deals. The man who was just as human as the rest of us. And it struck me, this wasn't just about him repaying a debt. This was about him rediscovering his purpose. It was a journey of self-redemption. "You don't owe me anything, Robert," I said quietly. "I did what anyone would have done in that situation. I'm glad I could help, but I don't need anything in return." He nodded, but his eyes never left mine. "I know, but I don't want to simply repay you with a thank you. I want to do something that matters, something that will impact people's lives in a way that's far greater than any business venture I've ever been a part of. And I think you might be able to help me." I stared at him, unsure of what he meant. "What do you mean? How could I help you?" He leaned forward, his expression earnest. "I've been thinking about creating something, an organization, or maybe a foundation, focused on helping people who've been through hardship, people who have nowhere to turn. You see, after what happened in the woods, I realized how lucky I was. I had everything before, but it was all superficial. There are people out there who are struggling, people who are fighting every day just to survive, and they don't have the resources or the support they need." I could feel the sincerity in his voice, but I also felt a weight on my chest. What he was proposing wasn't something small. It was huge. It was a mission that could take years to accomplish, possibly even longer. But the more I listened, the more I realized that Robert wasn't asking me to help for the sake of his own redemption. He was asking because he genuinely believed in making a difference. "You want to help people?" I asked, still processing the magnitude of what he was suggesting. "Why me? What could I possibly have to offer?" He smiled softly. "Because you understand. You've seen what it's like to struggle, to not have enough. You're grounded. You know what matters. I've been surrounded by people my whole life, but they were all looking for what I could do for them, not the other way around. You're different, Sarah. You've lived through things, and you have the heart for it." I sat back, the words hanging in the air between us. I didn't know what to say. I had always lived a life of survival, not luxury. I didn't have the resources that Robert did, but I had something far more valuable: experiences, empathy, and a deep desire to make a difference. "But what about your life?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "You were a millionaire. You could go back to that life if you wanted to." Robert shook his head, his eyes filled with conviction. "I don't want that anymore. I want to make a real impact. I've spent too many years chasing after things that don't matter. Now, I want to build something that's bigger than myself." His words resonated deeply with me. I had never been interested in wealth or power, but the idea of making a difference, that was something I could get behind. Maybe I didn't have the resources or the connections, but I had something just as important: the drive to help those who needed it most. Over the next few weeks, we began to sketch out ideas. We brainstormed ways to build this foundation, ways to reach people who had been overlooked and forgotten. The more we talked, the more I realized that Robert's vision wasn't just about helping people, it was about transforming lives. It was about showing people that no matter how low they had fallen, there was always hope for a new beginning. But building something from the ground up wouldn't be easy. We would need funding, support, and most importantly, trust. People didn't know Robert's story. They didn't know that he was once a man who had everything and lost it all. But as we continued working together, I saw something in him that made me believe in his vision, an authenticity that was rare, even in the most successful people. It wasn't long before Robert began to share his story publicly. He spoke about his fall from grace, the lessons he had learned, and his newfound commitment to giving back. And to my surprise, people listened. They didn't judge him for his past mistakes. They admired his courage for coming forward and offering a chance at redemption. Soon, the foundation began to take shape. Robert used his business connections to secure initial funding, but it was his genuine passion that attracted volunteers, donors, and supporters. And every step of the way, I was there, working alongside him, watching as his vision became a reality. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was part of something bigger than myself. I had always dreamed of making a difference, of helping others, but never in a way that felt so personal, so real. And through it all, I realized that the impact we were making wasn't just about the people we were helping. It was about the transformation that was taking place within both Robert and me. From the moment I found him in the woods, lying unconscious and on the brink of death, I never could have imagined how much our lives would change. But as we stood together at the opening of our first community center, the smile on Robert's face said it all. He had found his purpose, and I had found mine. And together, we were changing the world, one life at a time. The road less traveled. As the foundation grew, so did the sense of fulfillment that filled Robert and me. But while the world saw the progress we were making, neither of us could shake the feeling that we were only scratching the surface. Our work was important, yes, but there was something deeper, something more profound at play beneath the surface. It was as if we were on the cusp of something bigger, and I could feel the weight of it in every conversation, in every decision we made. The foundation had gained momentum quickly, and we were reaching more people than we had ever imagined. We started organizing community outreach programs, providing resources to families who were struggling, offering mentorship to at-risk youth, and bringing together a network of volunteers who were just as passionate as we were. But as the success of our work continued to grow, so did the challenges. The demand for our services began to outpace our resources, and the reality of running such a large-scale operation hit us harder than either of us had expected. I sat in Robert's office late one night, staring at the stacks of paperwork on my desk. My mind was racing with numbers, deadlines, and unanswered questions. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about the people we were trying to help. The pressure was mounting, and with it came a feeling of uncertainty. Could we really make this sustainable? Could we reach even more people without burning ourselves out? Robert walked in, his expression as tired as mine. He had always been the visionary, the one who saw the big picture, but lately I had noticed a change in him. The same clarity and sense of purpose he had once exuded now seemed clouded by exhaustion. He hadn't been sleeping well, and I could tell that the weight of our responsibility was wearing on him. "Hey," I said, looking up from the papers in front of me. "We need to talk." He nodded, sitting down across from me. His eyes were heavy, but there was still a flicker of determination behind them. "What's on your mind?" "I don't know if we're ready for all of this," I confessed. "We've come so far, but I'm starting to feel like we're getting in over our heads. There's so much to do, and we can't keep up. And I'm worried that we're not helping people in the way we imagined. We're just putting out fires." Robert sighed, rubbing his temples as if trying to ward off the headache that was brewing. "I've been feeling the same way," he admitted. "It's not that we aren't doing good work, it's that we're not doing enough. Every time we solve one problem, two more pop up, and I'm worried that we're not actually changing people's lives in the way we promised." His words struck a chord with me. We had started this journey with the dream of transforming lives, of helping people who had been forgotten. But somewhere along the way, we had become so focused on the logistics that we had lost sight of the deeper impact we were trying to make. "We can't keep burning ourselves out like this," I said softly. If we're going to make a real difference, we need to step back and reassess. Maybe we're not doing the right things, or maybe we're doing too many things at once. Robert leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling as if searching for answers in the air above us. He was silent for a long moment, and I could see the internal struggle playing. But even as we redefined our approach, there was still a part of me that felt something was missing. I had always been driven by a desire to help, but now I found myself questioning if this was the kind of difference I wanted to make. Was this the work I was truly passionate about, or had I been swept up in the momentum of someone else's dream? As I sat alone one night, reflecting on everything that had happened, a thought came to me, a thought that felt almost like a whisper at first, but quickly grew louder. Maybe this was the time to go my own way, to build something of my own, something that would allow me to pursue the change I wanted to see in the world on my own terms. I wasn't sure what it would look like or where to begin, but I knew I had to explore it. The feeling in my chest had been growing for weeks now, and I couldn't ignore it any longer. It wasn't about abandoning Robert or the foundation. It was about finding my own path, one that felt truer to who I was becoming. The next morning, I met with Robert at our usual cafe. I could see the changes in him too. He was no longer the man who had rushed headfirst into everything, blindly chasing success. Now he was thoughtful, introspective, and still deeply committed to the foundation. But something in me had shifted, and I couldn't ignore it. "Robert," I began, my voice shaky but resolute, "I need to talk to you about something." He raised an eyebrow, sensing the seriousness in my tone. "What's on your mind?" I think I need to step away," I said, the words tasting unfamiliar but necessary. "I've been thinking a lot about my own journey, and I'm not sure I can be part of this in the way you need me to be. I want to help, but I need to find my own path too." His face softened, and I saw a flicker of understanding in his eyes. "I get it, Sarah. I really do. You've been with me from the start, and I couldn't have done this without you. But I think I understand what you're saying. You have to follow your own instincts, and that's something I respect." It wasn't easy to leave, but I knew it was the right decision. My time with Robert had been a chapter in my life, one that had shaped me, that had given me new perspectives. But the road ahead was calling, and it was time to take the first steps in a direction that felt more aligned with my own values. As I left the cafe that day, I didn't feel fear or doubt. I felt a quiet confidence, as though I had finally found the courage to trust myself and follow the path that was meant for me. Robert was on his own journey now, and I was on mine. But our stories were intertwined, and I knew that no matter where life took us, the impact of what we had built together would never be forgotten. The road less traveled was never easy, but it was the one that led to where I needed to be. Full circle. Months passed since I made the decision to walk away from the foundation. The path I had chosen wasn't an easy one. It was a solitary road, one that demanded self-reliance, introspection, and a deep trust in my own intuition. I spent that time reflecting, planning, and connecting with people who shared my passion for real, meaningful change. But even as I carved out my own space in the world, there was one thing that lingered in my heart. The memory of the man who had started it all. Robert. I had heard through mutual contacts that the foundation had grown beyond anything either of us had imagined. Robert had found his stride, using his business acumen to attract investors who believed in his vision of social change. He had created programs that focused on job placement for those in need, mental health support for individuals recovering from addiction, and financial literacy programs for families at risk of poverty. The people he had set out to help were now thriving because of his dedication, and I couldn't help but feel proud of what he had accomplished. But even as I observed from the sidelines, I knew that the work we had started together had changed both of us. Robert had built his life around helping others, and I too had learned something profound from the journey we'd shared. In all the years I had spent searching for meaning, I had never imagined that the catalyst for change would come through one chance encounter in the woods. A single decision to help someone in need had set off a ripple effect that was still changing lives, including my own. One afternoon, as I was walking down a quiet street, lost in thought, I saw him. Robert. He was standing outside a coffee shop, his back to me, talking to a group of people who were gathered around him. I had to stop for a moment to take him in. He looked different now, more grounded, more centered. His once sharp, business-like demeanor had softened into something more approachable, more human. He was no longer the man who had been obsessed with power, wealth, and success. Instead, he was a man who had found purpose, and through that purpose, he had found peace. Without thinking, I walked up to him, my heart racing a little as I approached. "Robert," I said, surprising myself by how steady my voice was. He turned, and when his eyes met mine, something flickered there, a recognition, a memory of all the work we had done together, and the bond we had shared. He smiled, not just with his lips, but with his eyes, as if seeing me was a moment of calm in his otherwise hectic world. "Sarah," he said, his voice warm and genuine, "I didn't expect to see you. It's been a while." I nodded, smiling back. "I know. I've been keeping my distance. You've been doing great things. I've been following along." "I appreciate that," he replied, looking a little humbled. "But I know it wasn't just me. It was the work we did together. You were a part of this from the very beginning, Sarah, and you always will be." The weight of his words settled over me, and for a moment, I felt the pull of everything we had built. But as I looked into his eyes, I knew the journey we had taken was never about us. It was about the lives we had touched, the people whose stories we had helped to rewrite. "I'm proud of you, Robert," I said, my voice steady. "You've done something incredible here. But I think we both know the impact we made wasn't just about the foundation. It was about changing who we were too. We didn't just give people a second chance. We gave ourselves one as well." He looked at me thoughtfully, nodding slowly. "You're right. When I was lying there in that forest, I never imagined that I'd end up here. But it was because of you that I realized I had a second chance, not just to change my own life, but to help others change theirs." We stood there for a moment, two people who had crossed paths in the most unlikely of circumstances, and yet here we were, each of us transformed in our own way. "I don't regret what happened," he continued, his voice quiet. "But I also know that I couldn't have done it without you. Without you showing me what it means to truly live, to be connected to something bigger than myself." I smiled, the weight in my chest lifting. We were always connected. That was never in doubt. I just had to find my own path. And I think you found yours. He nodded, his gaze intense. "You've been a part of this journey every step of the way. And if there's ever a time you want to come back, to work together again, you know where to find me." The offer was there, open, unspoken, but it wasn't what I needed anymore. The road we had taken together had served its purpose. It had led us to different destinations, but the foundation we had built, the lives we had changed, would always be a part of who we were. I didn't need to go back to the foundation to prove anything to myself. I had my own work now, my own path to follow. But the lesson I had learned, the power of second chances, of helping others, of choosing to make a difference, would stay with me forever. As I turned to leave, Robert called after me. "Take care, Sarah. And don't forget, you're always a part of this." I turned back, meeting his gaze one last time. And I realized something then. We weren't just the sum of our successes or our failures. We were the stories we created along the way, the lives we touched, the choices we made, and the courage we found to step out of our comfort zones and make a difference. And as I walked away, I knew that no matter where life took us from here, we would always be a part of each other's story. The road that began with a simple act of kindness in the woods had come full circle, and while our paths had diverged, the impact of what we had created together would echo far beyond anything we could have imagined. It wasn't about what we had achieved. It was about what we had become. And that was enough. This concludes the story. Thank you for watching until the end. I hope you found it enjoyable. If you did, please consider liking the video and sharing it with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and activate the notification bell for more captivating stories. Have a great day.